I was employed as a corrections officer, and after our prison director brought his daughter into the facility, he began questioning inmates relentlessly for answers. When I attempted to step in, he coerced me, threatened my loved ones, and turned our community against me. So I turned the tables on him, using his own tactics, which ultimately unraveled his entire existence. I used to serve as a corrections officer, and one day our director thought it would be a good idea to bring his 10-year-old daughter to the prison to show her his workplace. He left her alone in his office for a brief moment, and she wandered off. 10 minutes later, he found her in a hallway, her head bloodied and her pants zippered down. The image of him cradling her lifeless body, whispering, "Daddy's here, sweetheart," for hours, is something I'll never erase from my memory. From that moment, he became consumed with discovering who was responsible. He didn't take a single day off, showing up the next morning, sleepless, and spent the entire day interrogating every inmate and guard. He dangled rewards, reduced sentences, special privileges, anything, for information. I watched him collapse between interrogations, only to smash his head against the wall to let physical pain briefly eclipse his emotional torment, just long enough to continue questioning. He gathered those he deemed suspicious, threatening them with solitary confinement, physical punishment, or termination for staff. He even coerced an inmate to wear a wire in the yard to catch a confession, threatening to add 2 years to his sentence if he refused. But his interrogations yielded nothing, so his methods grew harsher. 2.5 weeks after the tragedy, he arrived at work intoxicated, grabbed me by the shoulders, and declared today marked the beginning of the end. He then assembled all the inmates and announced that until someone confessed, they'd only receive meals every other day. The outcry was fierce, and he interpreted the protests as proof of guilt. He targeted those who spoke out, ordering us guards to discipline them physically. Some of us, including myself, felt uneasy and resisted, but he threatened our livelihoods, implying that hesitation meant one of us was responsible for his daughter's death. He roamed the prison daily, either drunk or high, banging on random cells, tearfully pleading for someone to reveal the culprit. When that failed, he began targeting inmates' families. He'd summon those he found most suspicious to his office, detailing the connections he had outside and what he could do to their loved ones if they didn't confess. Predictably, this fueled the inmates' hatred, and one prisoner, Jeremiah, lunged at him during a meeting. That inmate was stabbed in the arm and had 5 years added to his sentence. But that wasn't the worst of it. The director became convinced Jeremiah's outburst was a confession of guilt. A few days later, Jeremiah was summoned back to the director's office. No one saw him for days afterward, so we assumed he'd been placed in solitary. Then one morning, while heading for coffee, I heard screams echoing from the underground passages below. I followed the sound, and it grew more horrifying with every step, unlike anything I'd ever imagined. At the source, through a crack in a door, I saw it. The director had Jeremiah bound to a chair, subjecting him to atrocities straight out of a horror film, screaming for a confession. A table nearby held tools, pliers, blades, a blowtorch, even a buzzsaw. It was the most chilling sight I'd ever witnessed. Jeremiah was missing 2 fingers, his body covered in wounds. I froze, but before I could decide what to do, I began pounding on the door. The director stopped, approaching the door with a disheveled, frenzied look. He seemed under the influence of every hard substance, his eyes wild with madness. I shouted, demanding to know what he was doing, and he roared back that Jeremiah deserved to suffer. I countered that he had no proof Jeremiah was guilty, and he fell silent. Footsteps echoed, and I saw him return to Jeremiah, pouring salt into his open wounds while screaming for a confession. I pounded harder on the battered door, my fist throbbing as the old lock held fast. The director's voice rose over Jeremiah's tortured screams, demanding he confess. The sound of liquid splashing followed by an agonizing cry confirmed more salt on the wounds. Then silence. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. His heavy breathing came through the door's crack, and he spoke in a low, controlled tone through clenched teeth. "How long have you been there?" My throat dried up. I stammered that I'd just arrived, hearing something odd, but he cut me off with a bitter laugh. "You called me a madman 5 minutes ago. I heard it all." Behind him, Jeremiah's whimpers weakened. I noticed the director clutching something metal behind the door out of sight. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Peterson, another guard, appeared with his morning coffee. He paused, seeing me at the restricted door. "What's going on?" My pulse raced. This was my chance to expose it all. But then I recalled Peterson's daughter attended school with the director's other children. The prison community was tightly knit, complicating every choice. I steadied my voice, telling Peterson there was an issue, but I had it under control. He needed to leave. He hesitated, glancing between me and the door, but eventually walked away. Jeremiah's moans faded behind the door. Time was running out for him. The door cracked open. The director's blood-splattered face appeared, his eyes wild yet calculating. His voice was eerily calm. "Join me or walk away, but if you walk, you are never here." Three things hit me at once. My keycard logs showed I was in a restricted zone, unauthorized. The corridor's cameras, usually always on, were inexplicably off. And in his visible hand, he held bloodied pliers. Instinct took over. I backed away, legs trembling. He watched me retreat, then said, "Check the morning roster. You're assigned to assist me with a special task in an hour." The threat was clear. He'd planned for witnesses. I stumbled to the break room, hands shaking so badly I spilled coffee over my fingers, barely feeling it. Around me, guards discussed their weekends, oblivious. I heard Daniel say the director seemed steadier today, more focused. They didn't know what was happening below. My phone buzzed, a text from my wife, worried because I'd missed dinner again. She mentioned my phone kept dying, urging me to replace it. The next day, normalcy resumed while horror continued underground. I accessed personnel files on the break room computer, digging into Jeremiah's history. His record showed 15 years for armed robbery, with multiple infractions inside, fights, suspected smuggling. The other guards already distrusted him. The director had chosen his target carefully, someone no one would miss or believe. The main door buzzed, and the prison board's head entered unexpectedly. My stomach sank, but he only smiled, shook hands with the shift supervisor, and praised the director's handling of recent discipline issues. He mentioned a routine facility inspection, passing the restricted area's entrance, unaware of the torture below. The prison chaplain appeared at the director's office, holding documents for the memorial service. The director would have to come up, play the grieving father publicly while Jeremiah suffered below. The thought sickened me. My hands shook worse than before. The basement sounds triggered memories from my military deployment. Collins noticed, placing a hand on my shoulder, saying I looked bad. "Like when you came back from Afghanistan," he said. "This thing with the director's daughter has everyone shaken." My phone buzzed, a notification. The director had created a WhatsApp group for guards. Security updates. But as I saw guards added and read receipts pop up, I realized he was tracking who was active, who was neutral, who was loyal. I tried returning to the basement to check on Jeremiah, but new security measures blocked my keycard. The desk sergeant shrugged, saying the director had made changes post-tragedy. Everyone supported him. Who would question a grieving father's push for tighter security? During shift change, I watched him work the room, his grief granting him unchecked influence. Administrative staff now checked with him before approving guard requests. When I tried altering my schedule, the secretary asked if I'd cleared it with him. He'd built a power structure through his loss. By evening, I was unraveling. Sleepless, haunted by the basement sounds. During the shift briefing, I fumbled assignments, mixing up names. Oncoming guards exchanged looks, likely thinking I was drunk. My partner, Thompson, pulled me aside afterward. We'd worked together 5 years, always had each other's backs. Now his face was stern. "I can't keep covering for you," he said. "Report him or transfer, but I won't lose my job over your principles." That night, the local news aired a segment on the director's resilience. The reporter interviewed him at his daughter's favorite park, discussing the prison community's support. Online comments from guards' families poured in with praise. My mother shared the article online, commending his strength. The next morning, I learned Jeremiah was in medical isolation on self-harm watch. Only the director, medical staff, and select guards could access him. His bandaged hands and bruised arms were hidden from view. Rodriguez, my friend since training, approached during lunch. Our kids were friends. He looked uneasy, admitting his son applied to a criminal justice program and needed the director's recommendation. The message was clear. Don't make him choose between our friendship and his son's future. I saw how trapped I was. Proving Jeremiah's torture over self-harm would mean admitting I'd been in a restricted area unauthorized. Every move was anticipated. At 2 a.m., I found the director in the bathroom washing blood from his uniform. He looked up, smiled coldly, and said, "Jeremiah had another incident." We stood in silence, mutual understanding clear. He knew I knew. I knew he'd ruin me if I spoke. This wasn't about justice anymore, it was a strategic game, and I was losing. The director's psychological campaign intensified the next week. I learned he'd joined the same grief support group as my widowed sister-in-law, Sarah. She mentioned at dinner how this kind man who lost his daughter sent her comforting Bible verses. My blood froze when she showed me the texts, verses her late husband loved, details only accessible through personnel files. That night my wife noticed my distress. I tried explaining the torture I'd seen. She frowned, confused, saying I'd told her yesterday I'd only heard rumors, not witnessed anything. The stress was clouding my memory, making me an unreliable witness, even to my family. The next day, I found my own incident reports from 3 years ago, a commendation praising the director's handling of a prison riot. My own words, my signature, endorsing his harsh methods. He'd kept copies. My son came home crying. The director's 8-year-old told him at recess that his dad said my dad was unwell and might hurt people. The war had reached our kids. I tried explaining to my son that adults sometimes clash over serious matters. I pulled break room footage from the night I found the torture. It showed me entering the restricted area, time-stamped clearly. But the camera didn't cover the corridor to the torture room, a known blind spot. The footage proved I was somewhere I shouldn't have been, but not what I'd seen. The prison psychologist called me for a mandatory evaluation. She noted my fatigue and trauma response to the child's death, recommending medical leave. Her report would label my focus on the director as paranoia. Another move against me. Late one night, I recalled watching the director type his password in Better Times. I tried variations of his daughter's name on an unattended terminal, seeking evidence. After 3 failed attempts, the system locked, and I knew it would flag it by morning. Reviewing shift logs, I noticed the director's special projects in the basement aligned with his daughter's favorite TV show. 7 to 8 p.m. he was torturing Jeremiah during their old cartoon watching time. The counselor pulled me aside after our session. Policy required her to report concerning statements about colleagues. My accusations would be flagged as signs of instability. I tried recording the director at his daughter's memorial, hoping grief would prompt a slip. He spotted my phone mid-eulogy, pausing to ask if I was making this about myself. The congregation stared as I pocketed my phone, humiliated. Shift changes meant I couldn't confirm if Jeremiah was alive. The uncertainty was its own torment. Was he healing? Was the torture ongoing? My union rep met me in the parking lot, away from cameras. He listened, then shook his head. Even if true, no one would believe a grieving father turned monster. He had his own family and job to protect. Another ally gone. I noticed subtle things. The director wore his daughter's Minnie Mouse watch, sat at her favorite cafeteria spot. Guards saw it as a touching tribute. They didn't see the calculated act I did. He offered me a day shift transfer with a raise to focus on healing. The words were a veiled threat. Take the deal or face consequences. I refused, clinging to integrity. My assignments worsened, night shifts in dangerous wings paired with inexperienced guards. Thompson requested a new partner. I was being isolated. Reviewing footage, I found another prisoner, Marcus, in the corridor 5 minutes before the daughter was found. But Marcus was on lockdown, a list the director controlled. He was never questioned because officially he wasn't there. We both realized the daughter's iPad, locked in evidence, might hold photos or videos from that day. It was passcode protected, known only to her. The prison doctor explained Jeremiah's injuries to investigators as consistent with prior self-harm from other facilities. Medical records backed the self-harm watch narrative. Every path I took was blocked. My mother called, her voice tense. She attended the same church grief group as the director's mother, Gloria. Torn between her son and a friend in pain, she chose neutrality, unable to fund a legal fight. Desperation pushed me to mimic the director's tactics. I fabricated inmate complaints to spark an external probe, reporting odd sounds from restricted areas, backdating them for credibility. I was becoming what I despised. I staged a chance meeting with a state inspector at a gas station. While buying coffee, I mentioned unusual inmate injuries, planting doubt in his expression. The director had taught me well, indirect approaches worked better. Before he caught on, I screenshotted the complaint system. Multiple guards had reported strange sounds from restricted areas, marked resolved by the director. Evidence of a pattern at last. The daughter's teacher contacted me privately. The girl had seemed nervous about the prison visit, though excited for ice cream afterward. Normal childish nerves, but it deepened the tragedy. My obsession consumed me. I missed my son's school play, staking out the prison to track the director's movements. My wife sent a photo of the empty seat beside her.